Hi everyone! I hope that you're having a good day so far. My name is Bree Flug, and today I would like to present to you Kenneth Burke, who is a well-known communication scholar. I'd like to apologize in advance. I have a really bad cold, and if it's hard to understand me, I am very sorry. Throughout this presentation, I am going to explain Kenneth's background, his teaching history, dramatism, the language of guilt, and lastly, the ballot or the bullet. There's a whole chapter in our textbook about Kenneth, and I apologize in advance for how much I am going to reference from it. So let's jump right into it and get to know Kenneth a little better. Kenneth Duval Burke was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on May 5th, 1897, and died at the age of 96 on November 19th of 1993 of heart failure. Kenneth not only dropped out of college once, but twice. The first time from Ohio State, then from Columbia. He preferred to study on his own. He wanted to write rather than follow the path of other college students and professorship. He became part of the literacy culture of Greenwich Village, which was supported by a small allowance from his father. In 1919, Burke married Lillian Batterham, with who he had 3 children with. In 1933, Lillian and him got a divorce, and he ended up marrying her sister Elizabeth, with whom he had 2 sons with. Now that we know a little bit about his personal life and who he was, let's talk about who he was as a professional. Burke was a 20th century American literacy critic who is best known for his rhetorically based analyses of the nature of knowledge and for his views of literature as symbolic action, where language and human agency combine. But what is a rhetoric? According to our textbook, on page 40, rhetoric is the art of using all available means of persuasion, focusing on line of argument, organization of ideas, language use, and delivery in public speaking. With all of his knowledge, Burke taught for 15 years at Bennington College in Vermont and gave many lectureships at Harvard, Princeton, Northwestern, and the University of Chicago. And people referred to him as a Renaissance man for his intellectual breadth and depth. However, he referred to himself as a gypsy scholar, asking people, what is he other than a word man? Outside of teaching, and many other things that Kenneth accomplished, the major concept that he is most known for is dramatism, which is a technique of analysis of language and thought as basically modes of actions rather than means of conveying information. He rejected the commonly held notion that communication is primarily a process of message transmission. He insisted, instead, that anything freely said for a reason is a rhetorical act. An actor choosing to perform a dramatic action for a purpose. According to our book, he chose this term to describe both his rhetorical theory and his research methodology because the two were so tightly bound together. Which leads us into the dramatistic pentad, which is Burke's best known method to figure out what the motive behind a message is. The definition of dramatistic is a tool critics can use to discern the motives of a speaker or writer by labeling 5 key elements of the human drama: act, agency, agent, scene, and purpose. Act is what is being done. Agency is the mean by which an action occurs. Agent, which is the person that is doing the act. The scene, which is the setting or background for the action. And the purpose, which is the reason or rationale behind the action. This may sound very similar to many of you because we know it as our who, what, where, when, and whys. The next thing that I want to talk about is guilt, which was Burke's catch-call term for tension, anxiety, embarrassment, shame, disgust, and other noxious feelings intrinsic to the human condition. According to EBSCOhost, guilt, purification, and redemption are 3 elements which are the culmination of psychologist Kenneth Burke's dramatistic process. Burke explains the terms guilt, purification, and redemption as representing the effects of acceptance and rejection of a hierarchy. He intended to see all hierarchies and social order as perpetually engaged in dramas. Dramatic action occurs because people object to the functions and relationships imposed by the hierarchy. Whenever a person rejects the traditional hierarchy, he or she feels as if they fail and consequently acquires a feeling of guilt. Burke compared rejection to original sin, and he believed that guilt is inherent in society because people cannot accept all of the rejection so common in social drama. In the image you see here, Burke believed that the motivation of all public speaking was to rid ourselves of guilt. Examples include, like I said in the previous slide, tension, shame, and embarrassment. Transcendence is justifying guilt in reference to higher calling. Mortification, which is the confession of guilt and asking for forgiveness. And the victimage or scapegoat, which is placing the guilt on someone else. The last thing that I want to touch on in this presentation is the Malcolm X, the ballot, or the bullet. Many of you are probably familiar with Malcolm X, but you may have not known that Kenneth Burke was part of the power behind it. The title of the speech, the ballot or bullet, refers to the means or agency by which the agents, or African Americans, can act as citizens to accomplish the purpose of equality, conclusion, Kenneth Burke was perhaps the foremost rhetorician of 20th century. He wrote about rhetoric. Other rhetoricians wrote about him. And there are entire university classes based on Kenneth's analysis. The Kenneth Burke Society holds conferences and competitions that give other viewers the opportunity to discuss and delight over his wide-ranging thoughts. And this is all according to our textbook. Today, I went over a little bit about Kenneth's background, his teaching history, what dramatism is and how he came up with it, the language of guilt, and lastly, the ballot or the bullet. Like I said in the beginning of this presentation, a lot of this is in our textbook, and there's so much information on Burke that I had to narrow it down. So if you are interested in him, there is so much more you can learn. He is an amazing communications scholar, and I hope that throughout this presentation you have learned a little something about him. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you the rest of this semester.